The axe stops mid-swing. Your breath catches in your throat. The forest has gone silent, that unnatural silence where even the wind holds still. And then you feel it, the prickling on the back of your neck, the certainty that floods your body like ice water. Something is watching. Something is standing directly behind you. Every nerve in your body screams, turn around. Look, see what it is. But you know better. Because every logger who worked America's frontier forests between the 1850s and 1930s knew the rule that kept you alive. If you feel something behind you in the deep timber, do not turn around. Do not look. Do not run. Because the moment you turn, it moves. The moment you look away, it closes the distance. And the men who turned around were found days later, miles from where they vanished, their bodies twisted against trees, eyes frozen wide, staring at something that was no longer there. Welcome to the Pandora's Project. Tonight we unseal the forgotten testimonies of the last generation who worked forests so vast, so remote, so utterly alien to the tamed wilderness we know today, that something lived in them. Something that understood how men moved, how they thought, how they would die. They called it the hide behind. And if you believe these American terrors deserve to be remembered before they vanish completely from living memory, leave a like and subscribe. Because what we are really studying is not monsters. It is the moment when wilderness became so absolute that fear itself took form. Part 1. The thing that stayed behind you. Picture Wisconsin in late autumn, 1891. The sun dies early this time of year, bleeding out behind the white pines before 4 in the afternoon. A young cutter, barely 20 years old, works alone finishing his final tree of the day. His breath comes in white clouds. His hands ache from the cold and the endless rhythm of the axe. 20 strokes. 30. The blade bites deep into frozen wood. 40 strokes. Then he hears it. A branch snaps behind him. Not the natural crack of winter settling. Not the distant sound of another crew. Close. Directly behind him. His hands freeze on the axe handle. The forest seems to hold its breath with him. He turns his head slowly, scanning the darkening timber. The white pines stretch in every direction, their shadows long and black across the snow. Nothing moves. No tracks disturb the fresh powder. No branches sway. The forest is perfectly, impossibly still. He forces himself to breathe and returns to his work. 5 strokes later, the sound comes again. Closer this time. Footsteps in snow that crunch and stop. Crunch and stop. Matching his rhythm. This time when he spins around, his heart hammering against his ribs, he searches everywhere. Left. Right. Up into the canopy where crows should be settling for the night, but the branches are empty. Down at the snow where there should be tracks, but there is nothing. Just unbroken white stretching between the trees. But something is there. He can feel it, the way you feel a storm coming, the way you feel eyes on your back in a dark room. The distance between him and whatever stands behind him is shrinking. He can almost feel its breath on his neck, almost hear its breathing matching his own panicked gasps. The young cutter abandons his axe where it stands embedded in the tree. He does not run because running means panic, and panic means you die in the wilderness. He walks back toward camp, forcing his legs to move steady, forcing his breath to stay even. Behind him, footsteps crunch in perfect time with his own. Stop when he stops. Resume when he moves. Getting closer. Always closer. Always just out of sight no matter how quickly he whips his head around. The walk back takes 20 minutes. It feels like 20 hours. When he finally sees the glow of the campfires through the trees, the footsteps stop. The presence lifts like a hand releasing his throat. He stumbles into the firelight and collapses onto a log, staring back into the darkness where the white pines stand like silent witnesses. The foreman finds him there an hour later, still staring, still listening. The young man says 5 words, and every logger within hearing distance goes quiet. "I felt the hide behind," he says. The foreman nods slowly and passes him a bottle. No one asks what he means. They all know. For decades, loggers working the American frontier from Michigan to Minnesota, from Wisconsin to Oregon, documented encounters with something that defied explanation. It had no fixed form. No logger who survived ever saw it clearly. That was the creature's genius, its defining characteristic. It existed in peripheral vision, in sounds that came from just out of sight, in the overwhelming certainty that flooded your body when you were alone in timber so deep that sound traveled for miles without hitting another human soul. Some loggers reported shapes between trees, massive forms that appeared when they turned their heads but vanished when they tried to focus. Others described breathing, deep and slow and patient, always coming from the wrong direction. Others felt vibrations through the earth, footsteps too heavy to be human or bear or elk, pacing them through the timber, learning their patterns, waiting. A few who glimpsed something in the shadows spoke of wraith-like figures, vaguely humanoid but wrong in ways they could not articulate. Forms that seemed to shift and change. Hissing sounds like vipers in the underbrush. But these descriptions remained vague because focusing on the creature meant it had already moved. But no one in decades of documented belief ever turned around fast enough to see the hide behind face to face. The moment you looked, it was already behind you again. Around the fires at night, when whiskey flowed and shadows danced beyond the light, the loggers told stories. The logging camps created an entire bestiary of fearsome critters. The hodag with its horned back and fanged grin, the axe-handle hound that gnawed abandoned tool handles, the agripelter that hurled branches from treetops. These creatures were entertainment, tall tales told to pass long winter nights, stories that grew more elaborate with each bottle passed. Men laughed at the hodag. They competed to invent the most outrageous agripelter encounter. But the hide behind was different. Men joked about the others. They whispered about the hide behind. Because while other fearsome critters were obvious fiction, designed to fool greenhorns and amuse veterans, the hide behind explained real disappearances, real deaths, real terror that every man who worked deep timber experienced at least once. The prickling neck, the certain knowledge of being watched, the footsteps that stopped when you stopped. Every logger knew that feeling. The hide behind gave it form and function. And there was one defense, though whether it worked or whether it was simply an excuse, the loggers claimed alcohol repelled the creature. The smell of liquor on your breath kept it at bay, disrupted its ability to track you. So after dark, around the fires, men drank not just for warmth or courage, but as protection. Or so they told themselves. The camps went through astonishing amounts of whiskey, and the hide behind provided convenient justification. Whether the creature truly feared alcohol, or whether loggers simply needed a reason to drink in an environment that drove men to madness and despair, the belief persisted. Every veteran logger advised newcomers to keep a flask while working alone, just in case. Folklorist Charles Edward Brown spent years in the 1920s and 30s collecting testimonies from men who had worked the Great Lakes timber camps. Their words carry the weight of genuine terror, the kind that comes not from stories told around fires, but from experiences that changed how a man walked through a forest for the rest of his life. One supervisor told Brown, "We called it the hide behind because that is what it did. Always behind you." Every man who worked the deep timber knew the feeling. You are cutting, and your neck starts to prickle like ice water trickling down your spine. You are hauling logs and you hear branches snap where nothing should be standing. You are walking back to camp at dusk and you absolutely know with every cell in your body that something is pacing you, matching your speed, staying just outside the edge of your vision. "We lost men who did not respect it," the supervisor said quietly. The creature hunted isolation. It never approached camps where dozens of men gathered around fires. It never attacked pairs working together within earshot of each other. It hunted the solitary logger working miles from help, surrounded by timber so vast you could walk for 3 days without seeing another human. And America's logging frontier created isolation on a scale we cannot imagine today. Millions of acres of virgin forest that had stood untouched for thousands of years. Logging camps placed 50 miles from the nearest town with no roads, no telephones, no way to call for help if something went wrong. Men working alone because efficiency demanded it. One man, one axe, one section of timber. Maximum productivity. Maximum isolation. Maximum vulnerability. The hide behind enforced the most critical rule of frontier logging, the rule that separated the men who came home from the men who vanished. Never work alone so deep that you cannot hear other men calling. Never stay out past twilight when shadows make the world uncertain. And never, ever ignore that prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you something is behind you. Because men who broke these rules disappeared. And when search parties found them, if they found them at all, the circumstances made no sense. What they discovered in those frozen forests would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Part 2. The Vanishing Men. A logger fails to return to camp at sunset. This happened dozens, perhaps hundreds of times across the logging frontier during the late 1800s and early 1900s. The pattern became familiar, horribly familiar. The foreman organizes a search party at first light. They find the man's worksite. His axe stands embedded in a half-felled tree. His coat hangs on a branch where he left it when the work made him sweat. His lunch pail sits unopened. Everything is exactly as it should be, except the man is gone. Then they find the tracks. Boot prints in snow or soft earth, leading away from the worksite, heading deeper into the forest. Not running. The stride is even, normal walking pace. But something is wrong. The prints show hesitation, places where the man stopped and stood still for long moments. Places where one foot drags as if he stumbled. Places where both boots skid backward a few inches as though pulled. The search parties follow these tracks for miles. They lead northeast for half a mile, then turn sharply east for no reason, then circle back west, then north again. No destination. No logic. The path of a man wandering or being herded. 3 miles from the worksite, the tracks end. Not at a river where ice might have broken. Not at a cliff where a man might have fallen. Not at any natural explanation. The tracks simply stop mid-stride at the base of a tree. The final boot print is perfectly formed, heel and toe both pressed clear into the earth. Beyond it, nothing. The ground is undisturbed. No signs of struggle. No blood. No broken branches. Just empty forest and a tree with nothing behind it. The search parties circle the tree. They examine every inch of bark looking for claw marks, looking for anything that makes sense. They search outward in expanding circles for hundreds of yards. They call the man's name until their voices go hoarse. They find nothing. The company records list the death as lost in wilderness, body not recovered. But the loggers who found those tracks, who stood where the boot prints ended and stared at that empty forest, knew different. The man had not gotten lost. Something herded him through 3 miles of timber, pacing him, directing his path, staying always behind him where he could not see, until it finished what it started. Camp foremen wrote in private journals that survive today in historical collections. The hide behind took him. The men refused to work that section. "I will not force them," one entry reads. This pattern repeated across decades and thousands of miles. The details changed, but the horror remained constant. A cutter disappearing from his work site, his tracks showing him walking in circles for 5 miles, returning again and again to the same grove of trees as if trapped by something invisible. A Sawyer vanishing, his body found 4 days later, wedged inside a hollow log, too small for a grown man to crawl into, with no explanation for how he got there or why he tried. 3 loggers working separate sections, all failing to return on the same night, all found at dawn miles apart from each other, all sitting with their backs against trees, frozen to death, each man's face turned away from the tree, staring into the forest behind him with eyes still open and expressions that made the search parties look away. Terror. Pure and absolute. And then there were the few who survived attacks long enough to describe what happened. These testimonies were rare and horrifying. The creature did not kill from a distance. When it finally struck, it closed in fast. Men spoke of claws, though they could never describe them clearly. They spoke of being grabbed from behind, of feeling something tear into their backs, targeting the stomach, the soft flesh of the abdomen where blood flows fastest. The creature gutted its victims, tearing out intestines, feeding on internal organs while the man was still alive and aware. Those who escaped did so only because they were close enough to other loggers that their screams brought help before the hide behind could finish. They survived with terrible wounds, scars across their backs and sides, missing sections of flesh that never quite healed right. And they never worked timber alone again. Some men died of fright alone, their bodies found unmarked but their faces frozen in expressions of such terror that camp doctors could find no other cause of death. The heart had simply stopped when confronted with whatever the hide behind truly was. Official company records blamed exposure, disorientation, wilderness accidents. But the logging camps maintained different records. Stories passed between crews late at night. Warnings given to new workers on their first day. The verbal testimony of men who had seen too much to dismiss it as coincidence. Stuart Holbrook, a historian who documented the Pacific Northwest timber industry, captured something essential about the hide behind in his 1938 book, Holy Old Mackinaw. He wrote about how loggers feared this creature more than any real danger the forest held, more than widowmakers, those dead branches that could fall without warning and crush a man beneath tons of wood, more than the spring poles that could snap and impale you, more than any of the 100 ways a logger could die. Because the hide behind represented something worse than death. It represented being hunted. Being stalked through your own workplace by something that understood how you moved, how you thought, how you would react when fear took hold. The forest was the logger's domain. He conquered it with axe and saw and human will. But the hide behind reminded him that in the deep timber, miles from help, surrounded by silence older than human memory, he was not the predator. He was prey. This fear served a purpose. It enforced survival rules in an industry that killed men daily. Work in pairs. Return before dark. Trust your instincts when your body warns you. Men who followed these rules survived. Men who ignored them left only tracks that ended at nothing. The hide behind gave meaning to the deaths that had no explanation. Your partner did not simply get lost and freeze because he was careless or unlucky. Something hunted him, herded him through the timber until exhaustion or terror or the cold finished what it started. This was not comfort, but it was comprehension. It transformed random wilderness tragedy into a horror that could be understood, respected, survived if you followed the rules. Part 3. The Death of Wilderness. For 80 years, the creature hunted. It followed the loggers from Michigan's Great Lakes through stripped forests and westward across the continent to the Pacific Northwest, where the last remote camps operated into the 1930s. Then, within a single generation, the hide behind vanished. Not because men stopped believing, because the forests died. 3 technological changes killed the hide behind faster than any rational argument ever could. First came the chainsaw. Gasoline-powered saws appeared in logging camps by the end of the 1920s, and with them came something the hide-behind could not survive: noise. Constant, mechanical, miles-carrying noise. A chainsaw at full throttle drowns out every natural sound in the forest. It connects you through pure volume to every other saw running, creates an audio web of human presence. The psychological isolation, that deep bone-level aloneness that fed the hide-behind, disappeared beneath mechanical roar. Second came the logging truck. Before trucks, logs were floated down rivers during spring floods, a process that required camps to be built deep in the most remote forests directly on waterways. Trucks changed everything. Roads pushed into the timber. Camps moved closer to towns. Daily commutes replaced weeks or months of forest immersion. Men worked 8-hour shifts and returned to communities every night. The kind of isolation that created hide-behind encounters, that weeks-long separation from civilization that made the wilderness absolute, ended. Third came federal safety regulation. The government began enforcing workplace standards in the 1930s. Companies were required to document every death, investigate every disappearance, file detailed reports. Lost in wilderness was no longer acceptable. Bodies had to be recovered. Causes had to be determined. Medical examiners, not camp foremen, decided how men died. The hide-behind could not exist in a world of mandatory paper trails and official investigations. But these were just symptoms. The real cause ran deeper. Between 1850 and 1920, American industrial logging harvested the vast majority of the nation's virgin timber. The forests that had stood for centuries fell in decades. Michigan's white pines, some nearly 500 years old, that had watched generations come and go in silence. Wisconsin's ancient hardwood stands. Minnesota's northwoods. Oregon's coastal rainforest. Washington's inland timber. Gone. Cut. Hauled away. Replanted with fast-growing commercial species on 40-year rotations. The wilderness that birthed the hide-behind was transformed into managed tree farms. Charles Edward Brown interviewed elderly loggers in the 1930s, men who remembered the frontier camps, who remembered what it felt like to work timber so deep and dark that human presence felt like an intrusion. One old logger told him, "Go into any forest today and you will see trails and roads, marked timber and measurement ribbons. You will hear cars in the distance and planes overhead. You are never more than an hour's walk from people. That is not the forest I worked. The forest I worked does not exist anymore, and neither does what lived in it," he said. The hide-behind appears in historical records for the last time in the 1950s, mentioned in folklore collections by researchers documenting stories from retired Maine loggers. After that, nothing. No new sightings, no contemporary beliefs. The creature simply stopped existing in the collective consciousness of American workers. The logger who feared the hide-behind retired or died. The forests he worked were gone. The isolation that sustained the creature had been engineered away, eliminated as efficiently as the timber itself. What died with the hide-behind was something we will never get back: a specific relationship between humans and wilderness. The understanding that some places were genuinely dangerous, that human control ended at the edge of firelight, that being alone in the deep timber meant being vulnerable in ways we cannot imagine now. Our forests today are mapped, monitored, crossed with trails and service roads and cell towers. We can call for help from anywhere. We are never truly isolated. We have eliminated the conditions that created the hide-behind. We have eliminated the wilderness itself. Final part. What died with the wilderness? In forgotten archives, there are photographs. They show the last stands of old-growth white pines in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, taken in the 1930s. The trees are massive, their trunks wider than a man's outstretched arms, their canopy so dense it blocks out the sun and turns midday into twilight. Between those trees, loggers once worked alone, listening to sounds behind them, feeling eyes on their backs, hurrying to finish before darkness made the walk back to camp too dangerous. Today, most of those stands are parking lots. The hide behind was real in the only way that matters. It was real to the men who believed, real enough to change how they worked, how they moved through the timber, real enough to keep them alive in an industry that killed men daily. It served genuine psychological and social functions. And when those functions became obsolete, when the forests fell and the isolation ended and workplace safety regulations made supernatural explanations unnecessary, the creature vanished as completely as the wilderness that birthed it. We gained safety. We gained efficiency. We gained forests we can walk through without that primal fear prickling the back of our necks. But we lost something in the exchange. We lost the understanding that some places are not ours, that some darkness does not yield to light, that some things watch from behind and turning around will not save you. The hide behind is gone. The men who believed are dead. The forests they worked are parking lots and subdivisions and managed tree farms harvested on 40-year cycles. But on certain nights when you walk alone through the remaining patches of old growth, when the wind stops and the forest holds its breath, when your neck starts to prickle and you feel something behind you, something watching, something patient, some ancestral memory stirs, and you walk faster, and you do not turn around. Which detail struck you hardest? The tracks ending at nothing? The men found frozen staring backward? The creature that gutted its victims from behind? Or the logger who said the forest he knows no longer exists? Have you ever felt watched while alone in the woods? Share where you are from and what stories your region tells about things that stalk from behind. If this work matters to you, leave a like. Subscribe so you are here when we open the next sealed record. The forest remembers what we have forgotten. See you in the next tomb.